right. Yeah, UL. It's a 4-year degree course in UL. So again, I had options. I had on the CAO, I had UL, and then on the other one, I had Queen's University in Belfast, and I had the choice of which one to go to. My brother John had gone to Queen's, and God, it sounds as if I'm doing everything to try and not do what my brother done. But at the time I thought, well, a bit of variety here. I'll go the other bit of the country and not go to Belfast. I'll go to Limerick instead. And so I went to UL, which is a beautiful campus. It's even bigger and more beautiful now than it was when I was there. And it was a tough degree course. It was hard work.
4 years?
4 years, and it was, 29, 30 hours of lectures a week. And we were at least, 10 lectures more than everyone else we knew. And you'd be constantly running from the last lecture to get the Donnelly's bus and the car park at UL to get back home to play some games at the weekend. So it was busy because you had a long week at university of either labs or lectures, and it was advanced mathematics, it was physics, it was thermodynamics, it was stuff that you're learning for the first time, which I found really hard. And then on a Friday evening, you'd run to the Donnelly's bus. You'd have 2.5 hours up to home. You'd be collected from the Cathedral car park, straight up to Cullifad, and straight out on the pitch running for about an hour or so. And then home, and then you got fed. And your Saturday was spent working. I'd done some fireproofing with a lad that worked down near us called Joe Fox. And I spent my Saturdays going around the country fireproofing buildings. And then on Sunday, you'd be playing a 1A or a 3A match or whatever it was at the time. And then run to the bus again and off back down.
Repeat. And in year one down in UL, what did the future hold in your own head? Where did you see yourself working?
Well, year one I found especially hard because there was a lot of new stuff in year one that I'd never done. There was chemistry in year one, there was mechanics in year one. So I found a lot of those a very steep learning curve. And I could deal with the mathematics, but some of the stuff I hadn't done any of before I found really challenging. And I remember sitting in a lecture at one point with a lad from Wicklow, and the pair of us debating whether or not we'd change in year one and go and do sports science instead. But I thought, oh no, look, I'll stick with it. But at year one, I don't know, because I didn't have a vision at the end of where I'd work, because a lot of it was so new. And it took a couple of years in before you really settled into some of the modules and understood some of the, theory and figured out, okay, I think I know where I might sit on this. And partway through, they sent you to work for about 6 months as part of the university course. And I worked in Cameron Engineering in Longford, but other people went off to work in Boeing and Airbus. And I realized, hang on a second, actually, that's probably more where I need to be looking here. I need to be looking at the aerospace firms, because that's the direct link to what I'm doing here, even though I really enjoyed working at Cameron at the time.
And, a lot of people find themselves or lose themselves in college. The whole exploration and where your life is taking you now, did that kick in college, or when did that start to be, or was it Cornhill a bit earlier?
Well, the first Sunday in June is traditional to go to top of Cornhill. So our uncle would come every first Sunday of June, and he'd drag us out of the house and up to the top of Cornhill. And we were fairly reluctant. We were fairly reluctant with a lot of outdoor activity as young people, but we were fairly reluctant to go up to the top of the hill. But that was probably my first experience of, climbing anything, was being dragged up to the top of Cornhill. But the real bug in terms of exploration really didn't bite until I got into work.
So, yeah, just taking us into there and your first job, and where did you end up?
My first job straight out of college was into Rolls-Royce in Derby. I had applied. What's that?
Making cars, of course, because that's
making cars, exactly. So Rolls-Royce, everyone thinks of Rolls-Royce, everyone thinks of cars, and they did start off making cars, but during the First World War, they were dragged in by the government to make jet engines for airplanes, and that continued through the Second World War. And then they went back to kind of doing both. And around 1971, they tried to build a big engine to put on one of the big new jets, and it basically brought the company down. They spent too much money and went bust. And they became the first big bailout, and they became the first too big to fail. And the government in the UK bailed them out, but it sold off the cars. So Rolls-Royce Cars is owned by BMW, and Rolls-Royce, the company, makes power systems effectively, including jet engines. So I went off to work for them. I'd applied as well to work for British Aerospace, and I ended up, the way it ended up is, I remember leaving Longford. I got a bus from Longford to Birmingham in England on the ferry, and then I got a train from there to Derby, and I arrived in Derby on the morning after 9/11. So I left Longford on the evening of 9/11. And of course, the industry had just been used to try and perpetuate these attacks. So I arrived in just as the entire aerospace industry was about to come crashing down.
Nice first morning.
Nice first morning. We were in the middle of training that week, and we were all evacuated onto the road because there had been an explosion in Toulouse in France, and they thought it was a terrorist attack on Airbus. So you became very aware that I don't know, should I unpack my bags here? You feel like an imposter anyway because you're new and it's a big flashy company. But it was, the first year was a trial. The first year was hard, and you knew you had to work twice as hard to stay there.
And what was your job in those first 6 months or year?
So I went in on a graduate training program, and basically they move you around the place. I was principally an engineer, so I went in as a development engineer, looking after the external parts of the engine. So developing external parts for the engine, developing new modifications for existing engines, involved in development for brand new engines that were being built at the time. So basically a lot of it was CAD work, a lot of it was inspecting the engines, a lot of it was working out how to redesign parts of the engines so that you didn't have any clashes and so on. So it was development engineering, but I branched out from that into the operations side of the company and helped set up the first operations center, which is like a big sort of Houston in NASA, if you like, but for jet engines. And I ended up in the customer support side of the business, looking after various parts of the world, including the Middle East and India. So the beauty of the graduate training scheme was that it kind of tested your skills in various different parts of the company to figure out, right at the end of 18 months, where are you going to settle yourself? And I decided to settle myself in the operations center, where you were basically helping to look after the global fleet of jet engines.
And was that solely your choice, or were you directed by the company as well, that was just an element you were strong in?
You get the choice, and if you can match the choice with the available role, then it all works. If you can't, then the company will come and try and work out what might be the best fit for you. I ended up being very lucky. A guy who I know, he liked me in a job I'd been at, the previous job to that, and he asked me if I'd come and help him set up this brand new operations center. And I thought, well, this is new, nobody's done it, this should be interesting. So I jumped at it, and yeah, that was the first big job I had there.
And then you spent 11 years in total with Rolls.
11 years in total, split it out by a few different places. I spent maybe 6 years of that in the UK. I spent a year in Hong Kong with Cathay Pacific, working in the airline, helping the airline on behalf of Rolls-Royce. And I spent 2.5 years working for a joint venture between Rolls-Royce and one of their arch enemies, Pratt & Whitney, but they also made an engine together. So I worked in Connecticut in the USA. And then I worked in the corporate and regional area, where some of the smaller aircraft and some of the corporate jet engines are built over in Germany, just outside Berlin. So I was very lucky. I had a great array of projects that I got to work on, and a great array of places that I got to live.
And that was up as far as the beginning of 2013. But if we go back a little bit earlier to 2005, and Irish 7 Summits was born.
That's right.
Just a little bit about that, and then we'll join the two dots up in a second.
In 2005, I was assigned to go out and work in Cathay Pacific, the airline in Hong Kong. And so I jumped at it, went to Hong Kong. I'd never been to Asia before. And while I was there, I joined the Hong Kong Gaelic Football Club. And we played in the All China tournament up in Beijing, and we played in the Asian Gaelic Games tournament in Shanghai. And if anyone's ever been to an Asian Gaelic Games tournament, it's a serious arrangement. It's a very serious tournament, and it's an incredible thing. So we lost the final of that tournament to Dubai, but we've been training in Hong Kong in very humid conditions, running around the Happy Valley racecourse where the horses race. We would be running around there in very humid conditions. So someone in the office said, you should give base camp a go now that you have all that training done. And I'd never considered climbing anything really, or going to Everest base camp. It hadn't even entered my mind. So I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I'll have a go. Went to Kathmandu. Myself and a Sherpa headed off up the 5 or 7 days up to base camp. Got up to base camp, saw Everest in front of me, all the mountains around me. And on the way up, I'd read a book. And in the book, there had been these references to the 7 summits. And I thought, that's interesting. I might have a go at that. But it was just a thought. And from that, I went back to Hong Kong. They were doing a mountain festival, as it happens in Hong Kong. And they had a movie about Kilimanjaro. So I went and watched it and thought, I'm going to do that. So that's where the idea was born, and it took us about a year and a half, maybe after that, to get everyone together that wanted to do it, and we headed off to Kilimanjaro in 2007, and that was the physical start. But the thought start of the Seven Summits started in 2005.
Okay, and then jumping forward again to 2013 and just finishing up with roles, and like you made a really big decision, a big life decision at that stage. How long was that brewing for, and what was that decision?
It was a hard decision. I'd been with the company a long time, and everything I knew work-wise and people-wise then was the company and the people around me. I'd been working a lot of really intense jobs that required a lot of my time, and my work-life balance was probably way out of whack at that point. And I was burned out, for want of better words, and I thought, well, I need a change. And I remember reading a lot about a guy in New York who had a design agency, and every 7 years he would just close the whole agency, and he would disappear to get whatever inspiration he needed for the next 7 years of designs that he would then have and make and sell. And he was a great believer in that need to change up every 7 years or so. And I think there is something in that. I'd been in it, 12 years at that point, and I thought, I need a change. And if I don't change now, there's a chance that I'm going to find it much harder to change later. And I wanted to do something different, but also I'd got to the point in the Seven Summits where I was looking at 2 big summits ahead of me, and really they demanded a lot more of my time than I would normally be able to give. So the ingredients were right, the opportunity was right, and I thought, let's do it, but it was really hard to do.
Yeah, so that was basically give up your job and fully commit to training for your last 2 summits.
That's right, yeah, give up the job. I knew if I wanted to come back later, I had a good chance that they'd take me back later. At least I thought I did anyway. Whether they would or not, I don't know. But I thought, well, this is not an irrational risk, right? There is some rational to it. But I wanted to train full time. I had talked about it to the University of Limerick, where I'd been an alumni, and I thought, well, is there any opportunity to maybe train there? And they'd offered me the opportunity to live in their altitude center full time while I was training, and I thought, I cannot pass this up. They wanted a lab rat. I was a very willing lab rat, and I thought, this is very exciting, because the engineer in me wanted to understand what's going on here. There's loads of data that they're going to have. I'm going to understand more of my physiology, and I'm going to be able to prepare, with a more data-driven approach rather than just a traditional approach. And I thought, this is awesome. I'm going to take it.
So, Paul, we're going to park that. We'll come back to it again in section 4. And I just want to go back to the Killoe and the Longford man in you, and the guy that's now living in New York, and still the love for the GAA. And does that help you feel more Irish, surrounded by the tall buildings, and just that relationship?
I suppose ours wasn't any more of a GAA house than anyone else's, really. A lot of our house ended up being involved in teams or administration of teams or clubs and so on and so forth. And my brother's the chair of the Down County Board. So it looks like there's a lot going on there, but really there wasn't a lot going on any different to any other house. But I think my love for it, I got involved in the minor club when I was a minor player. And back in those days, I was involved in the mid-90s in the Killoe Minor Club. And back then it was very, very typical to have your treasurer, your PRO and your secretary be players in the club. 15, 16, 17-year-olds. That's not as common now, perhaps, as it was then. But you were given a lot of responsibility, and you were allowed to try things out. And I owe a lot of that to people like John Riley, who was involved in the club back then, who said, if you want to get a sponsor for the minor team, because we'd never had one, just go. Go over and have a chat with Frank Kieran and be nice, see if that works. And you find yourself at 16 or 17, having these conversations with people and assuming the roles and responsibilities, and it was really great. And that really got me passionate about the admin side of it. I was passionate about the footballing side of it, but I wasn't as talented as the others around me. I was a middling footballer, but I lacked as a defender. I lacked probably you need to be fearless when you're coming out to catch a ball in midair, and you need to make sure of it every time. And I'd be more the pat down and chase type when it comes to defending a ball. And I didn't learn to get rid of that fear until much later in life. So I think I was a middling footballer, but I loved the administration side of it. And when I moved to England in 2001, I kind of left it behind me entirely. And in part because I was going to a new job and a new life. and I kind of had to jump into it with both feet. And I didn't come back to the GAA until about 10 years later. One of the club people in Killoe, Jerry Rowley, came to me and said, look, we want to have a web presence. Do you think you'd be able to help us with it? And while I was helping build the Killoe website, I had the same experience when I was trying to build the Longford one for Jerry Hagan a couple of years later. You had this experience of actually, you were researching the club and you were researching the county history, and you were going through all of these stats, and you were appreciating, the work that had been done in the lean years, how fantastic the rich years of titles were. We bought the ladies club into the site where it mightn't have been before, and just looking at the incredible amount of success that the ladies club had as well. So all of that kind of rebuilt my affinity with the club in a very special way. And I was working with my brothers on some of the history that they were researching. We were also rebranding the club as well. So there's a lot of different things there that brought you back into the center of what it meant to be part of the club and what the club itself meant to be part of that community,
You've used the word there a couple of times. I don't think you use it too much in your day job, Midland. How did you manage with that one?
How did the
English manage with that one?
Midland. They figure out kind of what's going on,
You've talked a little bit about, you mentioned John there, but I want to touch on some other influences that you've had down through your life, whether it be work or just in a personal life.
Yeah, John definitely on the football side. When I was in Moyne, we had a teacher, Peter Crossan, for engineering, and Peter was also our football trainer. And Peter had a very big impression on me, because his engineering classes would be partly engineering, and then he'd always, like, at the end, it was like a reflection on things almost. He was seeing how people were doing, and he was talking about things, and he'd always say, lads, you have to aim really high, and even if you don't hit it, you're going to end up really high. And he enforced that in a lot of the ways that he dealt with his students, and the ways that him and the other guys trained the team as well. And that had a big impression on me early on, because it gave you the confidence that actually, you can do something a little bit above yourself and beyond yourself too,
Yeah, Peter was a lovely man. And just then, as regards to what grounds you, so for a man that's climbing a lot of mountains, grounding is probably the last thing you'd say, but just in general life, what sort of levels you off?
I suppose, apart from the big, like, crazy high altitude stuff, I love just going out for a ramble, and put the earphones in and listen to a podcast and just settle myself down if I'm getting anxious about something. Rima's a great way of grounding me, because if I'm getting irate about something, we'll chat through it here, and she's probably more sensible than me, so that helps. And the job I have actually helps me as well, because I work for myself, and I'm very aware that if you're not good enough at what you do, or if what you produce isn't bought by the market, then you have to try something else. So you can't run away with yourself, because the market is very honest and very brutal as well. So that helps ground me as well. But I like my podcast and my audiobooks to kind of keep me leveled,
Yeah, and you bring up Rima there, and Rima is a frontline worker there at the minute. So we'd like to thank her and all of her colleagues, both here and in the UK, and anybody that's listening tonight that have family or friends doing that role as well. They're playing a blinder at the minute. So just like to acknowledge that. Can you tell me a little bit about what a date night with yourself and Rima might look like?
Well, I suppose for me, cinema and pizza. We both like cinema. We both like the Marvel comic or sci-fi stuff. Rima would probably prefer some fine dining. She loves her food, and as you can imagine, in London, there's no end of that. So I'd be happy eating a cheese sandwich for the rest of my life. But so we float between the cinema and wherever we can once in a while to go out to a nice restaurant.
Excellent. And then a little bit more about your priorities in life at the minute. So obviously we'll be touching on training being really big at the minute, but work, family, personal development, your business, where do things lie at the minute?
They move around a lot, and like in the last couple of months with everything that's going on, they've had to be rejigged as well, because my business has had a big impact, like a lot of people. I'm not alone on that by any stretch. So I've had to I've had to prioritize whether the thing I'm doing is relevant in the here and now, and whether or not I need to redevelop old skills or build up new skills and how I do that. So really, personal development and business development has come right up the list, because I can't necessarily do the thing I was doing yesterday or the day before. I have to reorientate myself, but also I have to predict what's the world of aviation going to be like at the end of this thing, not right now when it's really bad. So that's had a change of priorities, if you like. Family, I can't see family really all that much, whether it's Rima's parents or my own. It is impossible to see my own mom at the moment, except on FaceTime, and to go out and see her parents as well has some limitations. So yeah, you have to accept that, and you have to position that accordingly. There's only so much you can do on that. So that becomes a digital experience more than an actual one. So you do a lot more calls than you would before. But definitely the job front has come right up the line, because needs must at the moment, and I have to figure out what's going to happen at the end of this.
Yeah, and you're a freelancer. We probably haven't really said that. You're just sort of contracted in for maybe short or long terms at a time, and maybe multiple companies. So you can be dropped at a hat, and it's about figuring out how you can get the next euro or pound coming in.
Exactly. I work in creating digital products primarily for aerospace, and the demand right now, they're needed more than ever right now. But the problem is that the companies who need them just don't have the available cash right now. So you have to work out, okay, well, do I build things without getting paid and then have them ready? Do I offer them for a period free and then get the customer on board and then worry about it later? See, the amount of risk you have to take in that model has now massively increased if you want to stay engaged in the market, because you have to adapt. They're hurting, you're hurting, and you have to figure out how you can both continue to survive.
Yeah, great answer, Paul. I just want to touch a little on your human morals. It's something I've brought up with everybody I've talked to. What motivates you? What do you hold strong beliefs in?
What do I hold strong beliefs in? I think taking risk is a fierce important thing. You have to be courageous or you won't see any reward. So I'm a great believer in just try something, because what is the worst that can happen? There's a lot of folks who are paralyzed by fear of doing something, and the consequence of doing it and it going wrong is not anywhere close to being as big as what it is in their own mind. So that's really one thing. And I like to do meaningful work rather than just turning time into money, which is a bit pious, and especially at the moment where work is at a premium. But I like to do work that I think has a bit of purpose, as opposed to just doing it for the sake of doing it. So yeah, that would probably be something that I believe in as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say about the risk taken, and definitely for any coaches that's out there, excuse me, any coaches that are out there and paying attention. I have a little lad knocking around the house, full of energy, and we're playing with dartboard, and not the sharp darts, but the safety dartboard, and it's always trying to come up with a different game. And currently, it's trying to hit the doubles, and like he's throwing them way above the board because he's afraid of not hitting the double. So
yeah,
just always trying to get your players and your kids or whatever, take those little risks and make them feel safe with failure.
Yeah, and especially I like if you look at what I do on the mountains, risk is implicit almost. But like if you go into a Gaelic football field, there's absolutely nothing wrong with taking risk, and I think people maybe feel like it's especially in the era where there's a lot of tracking on how many passes and how many tackles you didn't make, and whether or not you should try for the point to level the game, or whether you should push on because you can see a goal ahead. Risk is a great entertainer, but it's also a great part of the game for you as a player as well.
Paul, I just want to touch again, it relates to your morals, and what would you not put your name to? So we talked what you believe in. What are you against?
What would I not put my name to? Probably any cigarette or vaping companies. I can't figure out why we're still smoking. Can't figure it out. Yeah, that's probably one of the key things I wouldn't put my name to. I do get asked to promote some things for the mountains. And one of the things I've found is that you have to be very careful in taking any advertising at all, because it comes with a demand. And if you're in a high risk game, you don't want to be standing, 500 or 600 meters from the top of a mountain, unable to move and thinking, well, if I don't move, I'm going to lose all of the money of this sponsorship. So it can bring a lot of unexpected problems that have unintended consequences as well.
Great. And your strengths, Paul, as a human or in the working environment, what can you really hang your hat on?
Strengths. I suppose I'm good at working independently. I don't need much hand-holding, never did at work, which I suppose is a strength. I'm not afraid to have a go at things, which I think is good. And I question stuff, which is infuriating if you're a boss of me, I guess. But I like to question stuff a lot. I think the things that that I look at as strengths probably make me a bad employee, but they probably make me good at what I'm currently doing. So it's not to say that I think when I was a good employee, I had a range of incredible skills there that people were trying to, impress upon me. But the skills I've learned to like are more independent and individualistic skills, I guess, for work and for mountains.
And then you talk about a boss, and I kind of want to see about maybe things within the business environment that could be transferable into a sporting context and sort of skills there. But every manager has a player that's really difficult to deal with and will question their every decision. So managers that have got the best out of you, with that being your trait, how have they worked that?
Getting to the bottom of the curiosity. So we've had, and I'll equate it a little bit to the mountain teams as well. We've had people on teams that question every single thing every day. Why are we going that route? Why are we doing it? Now, you might have published your entire itinerary long before the expedition or long before you start, and the questions come one after the other. Unless you get to the bottom of why they're so distrusting or why they're nervous, and it's usually nervousness more than anything, and it's usually fear-based. Until you get to the bottom of that, and they have confidence to let you go and let you do your thing and trust you, the questions will still keep coming. So for a lot of bosses that I've worked for, where I've constantly questioned stuff, sometimes it's a task of making me aware of the external pressures that exist that I don't see. So everyone has their job, and their job is always the most important job in the world, and they feel that anyone that's not cooperating with their job must be against their job. But actually, there's a whole load of other external factors that they don't see, you don't see, but they do see. And it's making you part of that world. Bring them into your world a little bit, and it goes a long way to them understanding why playing ball on that particular thing is important for the whole.
Yeah, and that is very important about So when we talk about building a team and involving players in the decision-making process, and, maybe a manager doesn't want to play a kicking game because the skill levels are not there to match it up. But if he doesn't admit that to the lads and get them to focus on what he wants to improve and just say, no, we're not doing it, we're playing a hand passing game, and you have a whole load of running to do. It's just those lines of communication, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it's purpose. If you're playing a hand passing game against a particular team because that's the way that you're going to get an edge against them, if you don't set that context and everyone isn't on board with that context, it's going to be hard to bring people with you. So it's about making sure that the purpose of what you're trying to do, and you're always climbing the mountain in front of you and not some different mountain, like the purpose has to be clearly set.
So we're going to rewind, Paul, and we're going to talk about 7 summits. So going back to 2005, and you said it just came about as an idea and you set it up, and then you started attacking the peaks. So you read the book about the 7 various summits. How did you start? Which one did you pick off the first, the easiest? And just a little bit about what are 7 summits?
So we picked, I picked Kilimanjaro basically because it was the easiest, nearest, most affordable option. When we started, and there was 5 of us started off on this, and we were all buddies from university, basically we didn't have a whole lot of money to our name, so we weren't going to be able to afford any of the 7 summits sort of stuff, but we decided to just focus on Kilimanjaro. In fact, I never mentioned the word 7 summits to the rest of them. I said, would you be interested in climbing Kilimanjaro? And we got a group together and we went off and trained for Killoe, and we climbed Killoe. And it was when we were at the bottom having a beer after finishing Killoe that I said, do you realize we've done 1 of the 7 summits? And of course, it's human curiosity. It's like, we've done 1 of them, well, what are they? So it's the highest peaks on all 7 continents. Kilimanjaro is one of the easier ones. It's almost at 6,000 meters. It has a very hard summit day, but the rest of it is not very difficult. But the summit day is very mentally and physically demanding. And so you've got the highest in Africa is Kilimanjaro, the highest in Europe. Many folks think it's Mont Blanc. It's actually Elbrus in Russia, because Europe, the continent, is this side of the Ural Mountains is the divide. So Elbrus in Russia is actually the highest in Europe. Highest in North America is in Alaska, a big mountain called Denali. The highest in South America is in Argentina, called Aconcagua. The highest in Australasia is Kosciuszko, a little peak in Australia. The highest in Antarctica, which I'd never even thought about having mountains. The highest in Antarctica is higher than the Alps. It's a peak called Vincent Massif, very difficult to get to, as you can imagine. And then the highest in the world is, and the highest in Asia is Everest.
And just give us some numbers. How many people have succeeded in the 7 summits?
It's a fairly small group, I suppose, in mountaineering terms. Less than 300 people have done the 7 summits, which, if you contrast against Everest, there's been about 10,000 climbs of Everest since the first one in 1953. So yeah, 7 summits is a fairly small boutique sort of gang, partly because the Antarctica peak is very, very difficult to get to. But yeah, less than 300 people in the world have done it.
And then, since you started off in the early days, how has the whole approach evolved? So you tackled the first one, you planted the seed at the bottom, or at base camp after coming down Killy, and where did it go from there?
Well, we had Killy done, so we looked at, well, what's the next obvious leap from Killy? Because you're not going to jump from Killy to Everest. You just don't have the skill set. There's a whole lot of stuff missing in between. So we went in search of what was missing. We needed a bunch of skill. We needed winter skill in particular, and we picked the highest in Europe as the next peak. So that was in southwest Russia. And we knew it was a big, icy, cold mountain. So we had to get some winter skills. So the next goal was to get up to Scotland, where you can do some of the best winter skills training in the world. The Scottish mountains in wintertime is a bit like cutting the top off Everest and bringing it down to sea level and training on it. It's insane. So we went to Scotland. We got instructors, because we don't know how to do this stuff. And we got the instructors to teach us how to pick up winter skills, how to use ice axes, how to use crampons on our boots, and basically how to survive with ourselves and our gear in extreme cold temperatures. So that helped us when we went on to do Elbrus. We had the training required. So as we went through the peaks, you were kind of looking between each peak going, what's my gap in terms of the skill that I need, and what's my gap in terms of the confidence levels that I need? So what do I need to climb in between in order to get the confidence that I could go and do the next big mountain?
And what were the mistakes you made early doors, Paul, and how severe were they?
Mistakes. What mistakes did we make early doors? When we went to Elbrus, we'd done the winter training in Scotland, and that was all fine. We hadn't done enough in terms of gear management, which sounds like a very small thing, but we got up onto this mountain. It's a long summit day. We were all geared up, expecting fixed ropes or ropes of some description on the summit ridge. There was no ropes. I fell off the mountain at one point, but I had trained how to do the ice axe arrest. So you grab the ice axe and you ram it in under your collarbone and dig it down into the snow. So I saved myself from falling, got up, shook myself off, kept going. But we realized then at one point that all of our water had frozen, all of it. So it was in our backpacks, underneath stuff, didn't matter, all froze. We had a platypus, but we had like a sort of an insulated tube coming to our mouths, thought the insulation would be fine, completely frozen. So we found ourselves unable to drink anything, and the accessibility to stuff wasn't easy because you had to strip off gloves. And when you stripped off gloves, you had a loose glove, which could then disappear. So we found that we'd made a bit of a balls of the gear management. And we needed to figure out, okay, if this was significantly colder and significantly higher, we'd be in significant trouble here.
What temperature were you talking there?
It was about almost minus 28, almost minus 30. We had a very cold day on Elbrus. It's the coldest I've ever felt on a mountain, because as we got further into the thing, we got better gear. And so better gear made it feel less cold. But I think on the summit of Elbrus, it was so cold on the summit of Elbrus that the digital camera I had just didn't work. The lithium-ion batteries had completely frozen. The only picture we have from the top of the mountain is from a disposable camera. Always bring a disposable camera. But yeah, we learned some hard lessons about the need to ensure that you have access on your body in different places. Put food everywhere. Put food between your gloves. Put food in every pocket you can get it in, and make sure you buy the right equipment to keep your water from freezing.
Yeah, and this is all about planning, and you know, planning translates into every walk of life, team environment, work, and particularly what you're doing there. And just your nutrition you talked about. So maybe give us a little bit of an idea about building up, because again, athletes have to build up their nutrition for match day and time their meals and maybe carb load at a point in time.
Yeah, we're aiming more for the aerobic side of the spectrum, I guess. So we're out for long periods. You're out for maybe a 6 to 8 hour day on any day that you're tracking. And if you're doing an Elbrus, you might have 4 days of, of 6 hours each. So carb loading doesn't particularly get you anywhere because you've got to do the whole day. So you've got to have food with you. You've got to be able to just eat everything put in front of you. We bought a lot of carbs with us just because they're easy to carry. That's one of the reasons why you bring a lot of pastas with you, things like that. There are a lot of high energy sugary things. It's not good for your teeth, this business. So you end up just taking in a lot of calories because you're burning a lot of calories. Even on Everest, you're going to burn maybe 6,000 calories in a day on the high mountain on Everest. So, you're burning more than you can legitimately take in. So you want to go there lean, but not muscular, because if you bring too many muscles to the mountain, the oxygen just gets all drawn into your muscles and you end up with not being able to maximize the oxygen use in your body. So you don't want to be very muscular. You want to be lean, and then the week before you go, you might maybe have a bit more pie than you would during your training. But you don't, it's not a strict thing really for training. A lot of the strength training, whether I was doing strength training or whether I was doing endurance training, you fed yourself to get yourself through the training. So, you were somewhat disciplined, but you were fueling yourself to get through the training, and you were trying not to carry too much excess weight, except for that week before where you might do a little bit of excess just because you knew you were going to lose weight essentially as soon as you arrived. But
And what about the health and hygiene? So obviously the two nasty things, having to go to the toilet. How do you manage that in minus 28? I know it's not as cold as +3 in Clonee when the wind is blowing.
You manage it quickly and efficiently. The different mountains, different toilet situations, none of them pleasant. Hygiene is critical. Like a lot of these mountains, in the early ones, you're going for maybe up to a week. So you're trying not to get sick. But, if you get halfway through, you can get through the rest of it and get home. When you go to the bigger mountains, you're away for 3 weeks, or you're away for, in the case of Everest, 2 months. You cannot afford to get a bug at all, and they are everywhere. So hygiene, like we're in a period now where everyone is acutely aware of the importance of hygiene. But when you go on big expeditions, hygiene is absolutely critical. You will avoid the people who are hiking because their view of hygiene for their 7-day hike is completely different to your view of hygiene for your 2 months. And you become paranoid about, and rightly so, about hygiene. And about making sure that all of the kit you have for your hygiene is easily accessible, making sure that what you're eating is, you're happy with where you're getting it from, that you're boiling all your water several times, that you've got all the right tablets with you for the water. So yeah, you've got to make sure that the infections are everywhere and they're out to get you throughout the expedition. And you've put a lot of time and energy and money and everything else into getting to that expedition. So you really have to be on top of that.
And frostbite?
Frostbite, when we were on Elbrus, that was another one of the lessons I guess we learned on Elbrus. 4 of us went to do Elbrus, 2 of us made it, 2 of us didn't. And one of the 2 lads that didn't make it, he started feeling like a tingle in his fingers as we were going up on on summit day. And in reality, had we had more experience around cold, severe cold, you can shake it out. It's a little tingle. Some people get it more than other people. You can kind of just, shake it out of your fingers or your toes eventually, and it's gone, and it's not an issue. But it freaked him out, and he thought, oh no, I'm going to lose my fingers, and he turned back. So a little bit of education there in terms of understanding what's happening to your body, why is it happening, and at what point is this okay, you can shake it out, versus no, we've got a problem here, I need to stop. So I've been lucky, I've never really got much frostbite. I've had some damage to my toes at times, and I've had more nails fall off toes than I could possibly count.
And you're attempting Everest now for the 3rd time. So there has been 2 expeditions that have been called off in tragic circumstances. Can you give us a little bit of context on both of those?
So Everest was the last of the 7. All the rest of them done. I had earmarked to do it in April 2014. All the training done in Limerick. Everything was going great. Went off to Everest, and the unique thing about Everest is that you climb mountains on the way to Everest to adapt your body. So it takes about 15 or 20 days to get to base camp, where you'd normally just trek up there in 7. So we go around and we climb other mountains and we do different things, and we're getting slowly adapted. And we got to the last mountain we were climbing before we went down into base camp, and it's basically the same altitude as Camp 1. So you're trying to get yourself adapted for Camp 1. And we were climbing up this peak on the opposite side of base camp. Got up to the top, beautiful day. I took some video looking back out at base camp, and across the way from us on the ice fall between base camp and Camp 1, the Sherpa were traveling up to basically help plan the camp for expedition teams coming up in the following weeks. They were supplying the camps. And there was a lot of Sherpas traveling in one area, and a massive serac or overhanging bit of ice, about the size of a car, just came away from the left side of the ice fall and came crashing at high speed down the ice fall, killed 16 Sherpa and injured badly about a half dozen more. And it was the biggest death event in a single day on Everest there had ever been. And it was a catastrophe. And for the Sherpa, you know, who we were surrounded by as well, it was a double catastrophe. So we arrived into a base camp that was in deep mourning. People were being rescued out of the ice fall. 3 of the guys were never found. And it was an awful time. And it ended up being a week of mourning, and we had a couple of events for those people that had died. And then it turned into anger from the Sherpa that there hadn't been availability of helicopters, and you know that the government were offering the families of the deceased very little money, and it turned into an industrial dispute between the Sherpa and the government. And it ended up with the government flying up to base camp, these massive, big, loud meetings happening just across from where we were located. And this went on for a week, and it got angrier and angrier and angrier. And we realized this is over. Whether or not it was right to go on, I think a lot of people were scared to go through the ice fall after that had happened. We didn't know whether we were going to go or not. There was maybe 500 or 600 people at base camp, and eventually the decision was made. The season's over. We're not going to climb this year. That's it. So basically, you're lucky that you came home alive. You're lucky you weren't part of the people that died. You're very aware of the impact there has just been to that community, and you've got to start again.
So again came when?
Again came the following year. I had a really hard decision to make about whether or not, because I'd been out of work now at that point since the beginning of 2013. So that's, 2.5 years. And I'd meant to go back and try and go to work, or maybe even go back to roles. And I had a hard decision to make about, do I leave this now, or do I keep the momentum that I have now, and I have UL here, and I have all of these ingredients that are here? Do I keep going now? And I decided to keep going, because the mountain is always there, and people will always say that to you, but the opportunity is based on a load of ingredients, and they're not always there. And no matter how many times people will say to you, it's always there. It's the climb is the combination of a set of unique ingredients. So for me, I thought, well, I'm going to push on, try this next year. So
and the window, Paul, is only how many weeks is the window to actually do it?
The window, so you're basically climbing throughout the entire month of April and half the month of May, looking for a weather window at the middle of May. And that weather window could be 72 hours, it could be 7 days, it could be 10 days. It's typically about 5 days. And they're not all together. It could be spotted between about the 13th of May and the 25th of May. Some years are fantastic. Some years are a disaster, where the weather window, which is dictated by a weather system called the jet stream. Some days, some years it's 24 hours and you end up with massive crowds like we had last year. And sometimes it's 14 days like the year before, and you end up with no crowds at all.
So then you're working in 2015 to go at it again.
So working in 2015, back to UL, changed the training a little bit more, done a lot more endurance work, got ready, headed off to Nepal, felt really great, felt actually much better than I did the previous year, felt much more ready. We climbed different mountains on the way to base camp this time. I climbed a mountain called Island Peak. It was brilliant. Everything was going really well. We got into base camp. We got through the ice fall where the accident had happened the previous year, and we got most of the way up to Camp 1 as part of our adaptation. We'd done it during the night. We came back down to base camp to get ready for moving our camp up to Camp 1 that night. And then everything started to move, and the ground under us started to shake. and there was a massive earthquake, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake in Nepal.
And how, on the edge of a mountain surrounded by snow, did you manage to come out of that one?
Just about. We had changed the location of our camp, and we'd moved closer to the mouth of the icefall. So base camp is about a kilometre and a half long. So it's a fairly long area, populated by maybe 700 or 800 people at the time. So it's a big town, temporary town, that then disappears when the season is over. And we were in at the inside edge of that, right beside the icefall. And when everything started moving, you don't know what it is. There had never been an earthquake reported on the mountains while Everest season was going on since it was first climbed in '53. It never entered your mind to think about an earthquake. We didn't know what was going on. We'd always had little avalanches every night. You could hear them. We thought this is a massive avalanche. I remember coming out and looking up the icefall, which was right in front of me. There was bad visibility, and I thought the entire icefall is going to collapse. We're all going to die. And that's where we thought the danger was coming from. And meanwhile, right behind us, a long way away, on this mountain, the entire top of the mountain had basically just rolled off it and down about 1,000 meters. And all of this snow that was sitting on top of that mountain fell 1,000 meters, hit the plateau around the same size as base camp, and formed a shockwave. And that shockwave came at us as an avalanche, and it was coming behind us, and we couldn't see it. By the time we saw it, it was almost on top of us. I couldn't see the sides of it. The visibility was really bad. So we just ran inside, got under a table, which is just ridiculous, really, because it's not going to do much for you. But you run under anything you can get. You look for anything that puts something between you and what's coming at you. And in your mind, you're thinking, I remember what happened last year. 3 of those guys are encased. They were never found. So those things are rolling through your head. And I was preparing myself physically for being tossed right up into the icefall. I thought we're going to end up being in the air very shortly, and you're just waiting and waiting and waiting, and then it hits, and by the time it hit us, the energy had gone out of it. So we ended up being very lucky just by the accident of geography where we were. If we were in the place we were the previous year with our camp, we would have been wiped out.
And when you say it hit you, Paul, and you ended up being lucky, like how far did it move you? Did you kind of surf across the top of it, or how was that?
Not at all, no. By the time it hit us, basically the energy was gone out of it, and it just basically just blasted the tents. The tent didn't move. We didn't move. We got up then with a false sense of security, thinking that wasn't too bad. That wasn't really anything at all. And we went outside and everything's covered in snow. And we look around and everything looked reasonable. And then as you look towards the middle of base camp, everything was flattened. The camps were literally gone. And as we started to walk, it kind of opened up like a plane crash. And we could see just all of this remains of camps, and everything that had been in the camp then became a missile and had basically taken down a lot of people. There was maybe about 60 people in a pretty bad way. And by the end of the day, 19 of them were dead. So we ended up getting to the center of the base camp where the emergency medical tent was, and basically said, look, what do you need? What can we do? And the doctor just said, you need to carry those people over to the far side of base camp. I remember the snow was all red, and we just basically got stuck in and done whatever needed to be done. And in a way, it was an amazing time because you were seeing people emerge from their climbing world back into the world they had before they came to climb. You know, the doctors re-emerged, the engineers re-emerged, the leaders re-emerged, and base camp within a half an hour had been completely transformed into like a high altitude A&E department. And we were carrying people and getting water. And I remember at one point, because I knew some of the people on the far side where we were bringing everyone over to, and these people had impact injuries, so long bone fractures, maybe impacts in the head. But we were aware there had been a lot of people that had died. And when we got to the far side, the guy who runs that camp, who I know from Antarctica, he said to me, we need some help to move the bodies over to the helipad. And I remember just stopping and thinking, oh, okay. And the guy who was with me from Norway, young guy, really, really talented climber, his face just changed color. And the guy who asked us, he's an expedition leader, and he knew straight away, and he said, look, lads, actually, I need you to do something else over there instead. And he diverted us, and we went off and got water and went and done something else. But you became very quickly aware that you're in the middle of a mess now, and you just better get stuck in. And I remember going through the middle of it each time we carried somebody, being aware that is this the start of it now, or like is this just a tremor before the big thing? Is there another one? So you have no point of reference whatsoever. You don't know at what phase in this you're in. You just know that this is a very extraordinarily big mess. And if it's happened here, it's probably happened in a lot of other places too. And that turned out to be the case.
And then, like, obviously fight or flight kicks in at that stage, and flight was not an option. So it was just fight and work through it and all the rest. And, just relaying it a little bit to the Hillsborough disaster and what people had to deal with in that moment. But it's in the days and the weeks and the months and the years after that, and you start meeting the families of those people that you possibly didn't know before. How have you managed that process?
Yeah, the fight or flight is interesting. I clearly had a reaction that day to do something. There was people around me that had a reaction not to and to avoid. And I learned not to be judgmental about that. It's the first thing I learned, because I watched people be very afraid. And I watched them understand that in order for them to protect themselves in the longer term, they needed to take a left turn here, not a right turn. And that everyone's turn was different depending on what you were capable of enduring at that point in time. So the people that decided they didn't want to go into the middle of the fray stayed back at the camp and prepared whatever we needed when we got back to the camp. So everyone had an incredible purpose, but some people were doing it in the background rather than in the foreground. And when we got down, eventually we got out of base camp and we got down to a village where we stayed there and sat it out for days. And we were watching people come down and come in, and there was climbers particularly from a UK team that I knew, and they were inconsolable. And you knew this was going to be a very long road for them. I wasn't inconsolable because I think I was trying to absorb what had just happened, and the enormity of it hadn't struck me, at that point. But I don't know, I think everyone deals with it differently, and I was lucky that I was able to deal with it as well as I did. I did have issues when I came back where if I was up at a tube station and I walked into the tube station and the train had just rolled in, my muscle memory felt the train rolling into the station and said, run. And I'd done that for a very long time. My ability I'd spent, a decade flying everywhere in the world on planes, and I was well used to it. And then I flew on a plane and we hit a bit of turbulence and my body thought, run. So there's a lot of stuff in the muscle memory that might never work itself out. But hey, I got to come home and I feel incredibly lucky,
So that's now coming on 5 years. I presume that the focus had to just go back to work for a while and maybe just took a little bit of a break from those two experiences. And so when did this itch start to come again, that you're not giving up on this one?
Yeah, I pushed everything, including every piece of money I had, into this. And by the time I came back in 2015, I had to start again on every level you can possibly imagine. And so I started again, and I decided I was going to start up my own little company, and Rolls-Royce were very helpful in helping me get a head start by giving me some projects. But actually, one of the things that happened is that when you're so focused on something for as long as I was on the Seven Summits, and I had a plan in my head, and 2014 it was going to end, but then 2015 it was going to end. Your brain kind of wires that in and hardwires it. And when it doesn't happen in 2015, I found that my brain was saying to me, well, when is it going to happen? What's going on here? I thought this was like a 7-year, 8-year project. What's happening here? And your level of interest started to move away from what you thought it would be. And the interest in something isn't continuously at a high. It sometimes takes a dip down. And I found that for whatever reasons, maybe it was the scares of what happened, that my interest just didn't live up to what it was before. And if you're not utterly fanatical about doing it, when you do it, you're going to put yourself in harm's way. When you get to the mountain, you have to want nothing else in life harder than you want to climb that mountain. If you don't want it that passionately, you're not going to climb it. So I found that I had to rebuild my interest in it again. And I had to take a hard look at the sacrifices you made and were making in order to make it happen. And I had to do practical things like build a business back up and get some money together and get married. There was things that were put on the long finger that you're like, no, come on, I have to let's get some order. Let's 1 more year. And I'd run out of my 1 more years. So, I put in a fairly heavy few years to get things back on track, got married in 2018. And then I started to see, okay, well, I can see a route now. I can see how I can get back to this. But I've got to reskill. I've got to get myself fit again. The opportunity isn't just going to be there because here's another year, here's another Everest. It has to work for you. And when you go back for the third time, there's very different dynamics at play. So the first time you go, if you make it, great. If you don't, look at you, give it a good old go. Second time, that's if you're so lucky what happened to you that time. Third time, very different dynamics, both external dynamics that you experience from other people, but also yourself. Your risk understanding and how you receive the risk and how you decide to react to it changes on the third one. You have to leave absolutely nothing to chance, nothing on the third one. And you have to decide, am I going to change the side of the mountain that I climb? I've been on it twice on this side. It hasn't been nice. Do I need a new environment to change my relationship with the mountain and so on? So there's a lot of different things like that you've got to kind of wire into the third time, which makes it different. I always have great empathy and sympathy with the Mayo footballers every time they went back to try and win an All-Ireland, because there's a lot of ghosts that follow you from the previous ones, and maybe the Avilara footballers too in Longford that had so many goals at it with Mullinyocht, and just they were in the wrong place at the wrong time against great opposition. But those ghosts do follow you about the place, and you do have to deal with them.
And so, okay, you can deal with them and you're responsible for yourself, but the people around you, your brothers and sisters and Rima and parents, what conversations do they have with you?
I do try and give them as much information as I can before I go. I was doing a documentary for radio before I went on the first time to Everest, and they interviewed my mother, and she said, "Oh, I'd be very worried now that there might be an avalanche or something like that." And I turned around and said, "How would you listen? There's going to be no avalanche or anything like that. There hasn't been an avalanche in the whole history of the mountain." And 30 days later, there was an avalanche. So I've learned that you're as well keep people prepared so that they don't get surprised. Make sure they have every ounce of your itinerary, but make sure they understand that things change. Try and communicate as best you can, but don't over communicate, because it actually knocks you out of your connection with the mountain while you're there. But you've got to communicate to some degree, and make sure that people understand that there's risk here. This is not a risk-free enterprise. This is a very dangerous thing to do. There's no easy way to say that. Climbing Everest sounds great. It's incredibly dangerous. So if you bring them on the journey with you a little bit, and if they understand the level of risk management that you've done, and by the end of it, I didn't realize that my mum was reading about the mountain. She understood parts about the mountain that might be more than I understood by the end. So the people around you are actually doing that little bit of work. And I try to be, square up to Rima and saying, look, this is dangerous. We've had experience last year of people that, we knew that died on Everest. And those things do cause you to have to start again on that process. But that's no bad thing. It is dangerous. You have to bring people with you. They have to understand it. You have to be happy with that. Otherwise, you're being irresponsible.
Paul, will you throw me out some numbers? You've referenced how expensive this hobby is. Can you give me some sort of an idea? How many noughts is at the end of these numbers?
My bank manager won't talk to me anymore, so I better tell you. In total, on the 7 summits to date, I've spent about 150,000 euros. When I started it, I didn't have 1,000. So if I'd sat down when I started it and said, this is how much it costs, I would have closed the book and said, right, I think I'll find something else to do. And then by the time you get partway through it, you start to see opportunities where you can actually get funding for these things, or where your career becomes linked to your hobby in such a way that you can see, well, if I'll only work that hard and get that opportunity there, I can fund this, and so on and so forth. So by the end of it all, the kit is about maybe 10,000 or 11,000 worth of kit that you're buying. Some of it I got here. There's your boots. That's $600 of boots right there with crampons on the end of it. So you're spending big money on a lot of equipment, which I recommend nobody ever scrimp on equipment. But you're looking at about 11K there. Your training could cost you maybe 10, 15K in total over the years. And expeditions are expensive. Everest is pretty much a $45,000 expedition minimum. You can pay a heck of a lot more than that if you want to enjoy yourself and drink beer and watch TV and all the rest of it. But no sense. exactly, you'd be carried up there, but no sensible person would spend under $40,000 and over 50, in my view. But you're paying for an expedition. You're part of a massive group of people. You're part of a huge operation at base camp. You're part of a big operation to get you back down if something happens, helicopters, and so on. So there's a lot of factors that you're one component of, but it is a very expensive thing. And the mountain in Antarctica is also incredibly expensive because you and your team have to hire a Russian military transport plane. And it's one of the biggest airplanes in the world. And you're hiring that from the bottom of Chile to land on a blue ice runway in Antarctica. And that ain't cheap. So I think the one thing I'd say about cost is it's a huge number and it's frightening. And, I didn't have it when I started. I don't have it now. But you do find a way as you go through these things to turn these scary numbers. It's a bit like you turn the scary summits that you don't think you can climb into manageable, understandable things. You can turn some of the numbers into that as well. And I was lucky that locally and with some local companies in Longford, I managed to rustle up about 20K of sponsorship as well, which is really good and really helpful as well.
And if anybody wants to start doing the maths, if you started smoking at the age of 14, 15, 16, and you're still at it at the age of 56, let's just see what that number turns out like.
Exactly, yeah. But there's also things like I haven't owned a car since the year 2000. Or not the year 2000, the year 2010. So I haven't owned a car for a whole decade. And that's a conscious choice because that's an expense. So you kind of, I'm not saying that that's going to get you up mountains, but you have to kind of figure out that.
Cut your cloth.
Cut your cloth and be realistic. If you really want something, you really have to go after it. And if it requires massive compromise on some things or a change in lifestyle to get it, you can get it. It's just about a series of hard choices and about how willing you are. And a lot of it is willingness, how willing you are to make hard calls in order to get what you want.
Do you get 2 championships out of your gear?
Do I get
2 championships? Do you get 2 goes out of it, or have you to change it for every mountain you go on?
The gear, I pretty much have enough gear for everything now. When you start off on the early ones, that gear, some of it you're going to throw away by the time you get to the big ones. But on Everest, you could use your gear again and again and again and again and again. You could get on those boots. I could get 10, 15 years out of those boots.
We've touched a little bit about the mercenaries that are going up the mountain as a badge of honor and doing it for the wrong reasons. Obviously you've encountered those, and how are their attitude and how are they putting people, maybe the genuine people at risk, and obviously the Sherpas at risk as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of people doing it for a lot of different reasons. I mean, the reason I'm doing it is because it's part of the 7 Summits. So, I could objectively say that that's peak bagging at some level. There's always some reason. It's a very egotistical thing to do, and it's a very self-centered ambition, right? There's no question about that. But there are, I think, especially in a lot of recent years, there's a lot of folks doing it without having the advantage of having climbed a lot of mountains before. And so there's a lot of inexperience in the rope line now. And that's changing the dynamics of the mountain. It's changing the amount of people on it. The crowds, if the window isn't big, you're now into major crowd issues on the mountain. And none of that is entertaining. Like when you think about the things that draw you to climb the mountains, being stuck in a queue, like I don't like the TV images of people queuing for IKEA. I certainly don't want to be in a queue on the Hillary Step, at up near 8,000 meters. So there's a lot of problems being caused by people who are looking for answers in the mountains that maybe the mountains don't give them. And I'd include in that, and it's a bugbear of mine, the self-help industry, where I think mountains are being offered up as a kind of an elixir for people to cure all of their ills, from mental health issues to everything else. And, if you've got some issues that you want to work on, 8,000 meters is not the place to work on them. So there's a lot of folks who are making a lot of money by encouraging a lot of people into places that they shouldn't be, and that's not helping either. So it's a vexed question, especially with Everest, because it's the biggest. In April and May, it's the biggest show in the world. People are always going to want to climb it. That will never change, no matter what the disasters are. But I'm finding that I have to make different choices now, potentially about which side to climb, because the crowds are just getting too much.
Tell me a little bit about the Sherpas, Paul, and the amazing people that they are.
Oh, they are something else. So Sherpas they're a ethnic group originally from the Tibetan plains. They're mostly Buddhist, very religious people, nomadic folks, and they settled in kind of the Khumbu area of Nepal, which is the region you go up through to get to Everest Base Camp. But they have these genetic factors. I think there's about 30 or so genetic factors, and it makes their bodies incredibly well suited to high altitude. They've got this kind of super athlete gene. So they're able to efficiently use oxygen in the way that you and I can't, because they have lived for so long and evolved for so long in the Tibetan plains. So, we'll be going up a mountain, one step in front of the other. You might take a step, take 10 breaths, take another step. Your Sherpa's ahead of you, just like relaxing, maybe having a cigarette, waiting, so their capacity to do that work. But the other thing that's probably not well understood about the Sherpa is that the Sherpa are guides. They're professional mountain guides when they work in the mountain, just like the professional mountain guides that work in the Alps. They're not there to carry your stuff. They're not there to carry you. They're there as guides. They're there as people whose experience in the high mountain is vast, and their capacity in the high mountain, should something go wrong, is immense. They're not there to carry you or your stuff, and they don't carry you or your stuff. But they're one of many groups that work on the mountains. There are other Nepalese who are not Sherpa who also work on the mountain. And in Nepal, the Sherpa they're like astronauts. They are the superheroes in society. They're revered, and the job that they do is financially so rewarding that it gives the Sherpa community opportunities in Nepal that other groups simply don't have. A lot of them are able to get their children educated and send them to US schools and so on. So it lifts the whole floor, it lifts the whole valley, it allows opportunities that don't normally come into an entire area as well. So the Sherpa are superheroes.
So just as you're saying there about the financial remuneration that they would have get, wouldn't have been something I would have given much thought. And a question that was swirling around in my head when you were talking about their genetics, has nobody tried to tap up one of these guys to run a marathon or run something else? But probably the reality is they're better off paid and they're better off known doing what they are doing.
Yeah, and some Sherpa have, there's quite a group of Sherpa in the US as well, and in New York City in particular, but some of them went to Malaysia to work and found that when they got down to lower altitudes or sea level conditions, their bodies didn't like it at all, and quite a few of them died. So it's the mixture of high altitude capacity while you have the low oxygen concentration as well. If you bring them down to sea level, in theory, they've got all of these red blood cells. They're just able to supply oxygen through their body at an immense rate. But whether or not that turns into, the best performance at sea level for them, I don't know. I know that for athletes that train for Olympics and train for everything else, altitude training is a key part of that agenda, and is a key part of any major athlete's training. But whether or not Sherpas make good athletes, I don't know. They certainly make amazing mountaineers.
Paul, I want to talk a little bit about post-Everest. What's on the bucket list?
It's hard to think beyond it because you get too cocky, but there's certainly if you complete the 7 summits, there's a little expanded version of that, where if you can go to the South Pole and the North Pole, you complete what's called the Adventurers Grand Slam. And that's a very, very small group. No Irish person has ever done that. So it's that's something that would appeal to me. I'd certainly like to go to the South Pole at some point if I was able to. So maybe the Adventurers Grand Slam, but I'd also like to, there's a whole lot of other mountains that aren't on 7 Summits list that I'd love to do. They're not majorly big, they're not dangerous or anything like that, but I'd love to go to them. And I'd love to start doing some of the trekking with Rima, in mountains that are accessible too. And I'm sure she will prove to be much better than me at altitude. But it'd be nice to kind of get to a point of doing stuff that's interesting, that you can share with the people around you as well.
Paul, I know you keep a great eye and ear on what's going on in Ireland. What are some of the challenges that you see there? And obviously understanding what's going on in the UK as well at the minute, but in Ireland in particular, what are some of the challenges that you see with us as a society?
I think one of the big challenges we all have is trying to decipher truth from all of the news we read. There's a lot of information coming into people's minds at the minute, and we're not designed to be able to decipher and control all of the information we get and make sensible conclusions based on it. And I think finding a way to filter out a lot of the stuff and finding an easy way to get to the truth or what matters to us is a really hard thing for a society to get their head around. So that's one of the things I think we definitely need to do a lot of work on. I mean, when I think about Ireland, there's the obvious things of, for me, if I was to move back, for example, housing is incredibly expensive. Car insurance is a no-go completely. If you've been away from the country, forget about it. So there's a lot of cost of living stuff there that needs to be tackled. But it would also be nice to see a second big city rather than just smaller cities outside Dublin. Cork needs to be twice the size it is, rather than, it needs to be a 1 million person city, so that you give people options. I've lived in Germany and other places where the rail system is awesome. I'd love if we had, in the days when it didn't matter if you just spent another billion because it was all going on the debt heap, I'd love if there'd been a high-speed rail link built around the country to try and connect places a lot better. Because the movement of people around, people are very curious in Ireland, and people love traveling in Ireland, and they love getting into other communities. And there's lots of people from my neck of the woods who love to go to county finals everywhere and are interested in clubs everywhere. So, having that better connectivity, I think would be better too. And
just what do you see as the inhibitors to Cork not expanding, or Athlone not getting bigger, not having this second city that you're on about?
It's a brave new world to do it. Like it's not a safe policy to decide that you're going to populate a city by twice the amount of people by, building huge new elements to it. So I think there's a lack of bravery at some level to just do big change. And I think to some degree that's not all entirely the politicians' fault. I think politicians are afraid that if they make major moves, that they won't be able to bring the country with them. And that public opinion, which can be steered from any particular angle, especially with social media, might just clobber them. And that's it. They're gone for a generation in terms of being able to govern. So I think there's fear on one side. There's a kind of a nervousness about what the public will make of it. And I'd like to see a little bit of a, well, what have we to lose attitude a little bit, because there's a lot of new things that we can do at the moment, especially right now when there's a bit of a change wind. There's a lot of things you can do, and you can bring the country with you and get away with it. And I'd like to see a little bit more. They do it in Scandinavia. They build out big second cities. It's not a big thing. But one of the biggest drivers for, the high cost of living in Ireland is that it's a Dublin-centric country.
Paul, the last few minutes here now, we're just some quick answers. We'll wrap it up. You've been so good with your time, and it's been really interesting. In public life, who do you admire at the minute in an Irish context or international?
I think internationally, I've always liked Bill Gates. I like how his mind works. I like what he's doing on infectious diseases long before it became fashionable. I was lucky enough to be in Grant Park in Chicago on the night that Obama was elected in 2008 and saw him there get elected. And I was amazed with the effect that had on the country at the time. So I've always admired his poise and the way that he's carried himself, even when he was being attacked left, right, and centre. And I think a lot of what's been done in Ireland over the last few months, there's certain parts of the government that maybe weren't having a good time before that have shown themselves more capable in the last few months than they were before. And they deserve credit for it. So there's some political figures that I admire, but folks like Bill Gates, I think what he's doing is incredibly important, and I don't think we're going to realize the gravity of how important it was until he's gone.
Yeah, and just when you're talking about the Irish politicians and certain people doing well for themselves, it's amazing how people can be successful when there's other people not knocking them and chipping at them the whole time. That's
true, and it was also interesting that the technique that was used to communicate with the public was very honest, and there was a lot of humility afoot. And the thing that really annoys me about politics here is that there's no humility. There's no admitting, do you know what, we got that wrong. It never happens. And the public is very open to somebody saying we got this wrong and we're going to try harder. The public will come along with you to a large degree if you play a straight card with them. And that's, I think, what a lot of Irish people have learned over the last few months.
Right, Paul, anyone that's used to listen to us, we're going to hit a little bit of the rapid fire stuff here. So just a sentence or two on each of these, or a word. Conor McGregor.
Arrogant. Not for me. Mary
Lou McDonald.
She's a tough operator.
Michael O'Leary in your own field.
Infuriating, but often right.
Boris Johnson.
Oh, charlatan, Pied Piper.
His twin brother, Donald Trump.
Oh, dangerous con man.
Bono.
Legend, often unfairly, I think, criticised.
Do you think he gets criticised more in Ireland than he does outside?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Love Island.
Better than you'd think.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say, I was very skeptical about it, and Maura was on it, so I sat down and watched it. And it's interesting. There are baddies and there are goodies, and it's interesting watching the nature of the goodies.
We've talked a lot about your adventures and all the rest, but I want to know what scares you.
What scares me? I suppose I do have a fear of going to number 3 on Everest and not succeeding. So that I carry that around with me a little bit. So I've got to overcome that. And I think losing your purpose, like we're in a very unusual time at the minute, and I've had to work out how to reinvent my work. And there's a chance you can reinvent it and there's nothing there. And there's a chance that there's no work, and there's a chance you have to start again. And I think I find that scary. I find the current climate scary. It doesn't debilitate me or paralyze me, but it is a frightening time. And I think I'm very aware of that. There's a lot of people who will be feeling that a lot more than me.
Paul, I'd like to thank you so much for your time. I'd also like to thank you on a personal and professional level for the help that you have given me with Longford GAA and just the website, and somebody who was very useless at technical stuff, that you made it so simple, and I was able to keep the whole thing going every now and again, even though you pitch in with some of the more difficult stuff. But just from a personal level, I'd like to thank you very much. I have been very interested in what your story was, and as I admitted to you during the week, I didn't want to know too much about it. I wanted to experience it tonight and have ask the questions that I felt interesting. I think we've had a lot of the people that have been there have stayed engaged with us. They've obviously found it interesting as well. And this will be up on the website, the recording. I made a boo-boo. I missed the first maybe 10 minutes of the recording, but I got it then after that. So apologies to anyone that's looking at it after the fact. And then tomorrow night, we have our Return to Play webinar. So if you just recommend it to the people in your club. And on the 29th, we have Kieran Donaghy. So that'll be our final interview of the series. So thanks everyone for joining. Paul, again, thanks very much. I want to wish you so much luck when next March, April, May comes. Hopefully you get to the summit, you get a photo back, and everything goes well. You get back home safe to Rima and all the family. And thanks again for everything.
Good man. Thanks a million.
Slán everyone.